You know, Moses held a really special place in our home. In fact, I brought Moshe with me. Moshe Rabbeinu, when I was growing up, it was Moses the teacher. And you know, my mom hung on our wall a ceramic piece depicting Moses coming down from Mount Sinai. It was a very imposing thing and one that I saw all the time. Charlton Heston played Moses, and my mother took me when I was 5 years old, and the big screen, and I saw Yul Brynner as Pharaoh, and Moshe was Charlton Heston. You know, it was Moses that led the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. He was the one that guided them in the wilderness. He carried the tablets down from Mount Sinai, that ceramic sculpture that I saw every day growing up. He prepared the Israelites to enter Canaan. He wrote the Torah. Moses wrote the Torah. That's significant for me growing up. We were very conscious of Moses. And you know, Moses, as he wrote in the New Testament, here's what God said about him. Moses is faithful in God's house, in his own house. That's what God said. In Numbers chapter 12 and verses 7 and 8, it said that Moses spoke face to face with God and saw the form of the Lord. So it's because of Moses that I thought a lot about the kingdom. Growing up, I wasn't raised in a Christian home, but I looked for the kingdom. I'm a 50s/60s kid raised when things were supposed to be great, but I could tell you we looked for a kingdom. I knew we needed the Messiah. I knew that he would bring peace. I never heard the word eschatology. I never heard the word replacement theology or supersessionism. I never heard any of those words. But I knew that one day the Jews would make Aliyah and go back to the land. I knew that the nations of the world would one day know the living and the true God. I knew that the prophet Isaiah described a future kingdom in which a wolf will lie down with the lamb. I knew that we needed peace, and I knew that the kingdom had to come to the earth. And the way to do it, I learned, was mitzvot, commandments. We can bring Messiah, we can bring the king that Moses talked about by doing mitzvot. In fact, I remember a time when I was in Hebrew school when we were talking as kids, certainly not theologians, we're 10 and 11 and 12 years old, and we're talking about if all the Jewish people around the world would do one Shabbat, Messiah would come. In fact, there's rabbinic literature that says, though I have set a limit to the end, that it will happen in its time regardless of whether they will do teshuva, which means repentance, or not. The son of David, Mashiach, will come if they keep just one Shabbat. Wow. I remember in Hebrew school saying, that ain't going to happen. I knew about the law. I knew how many laws there were. I knew that this was something that teach sin. And so when we think about Moshe Rabbeinu, what did he actually say about the kingdom? I knew what I was believing growing up. Much of it text of the scriptures, some of it rabbinic. So what did Moses actually say about the kingdom? Well, let's look before Sinai. Before Moses and that ceramic sculpture that my mom had of the two tablets. Let's go before Sinai. Well, there was a kingdom in the garden. Adam was the theocratic administrator. That's not my word. That's Andy Wood's word. I'm grateful for it. Theocratic administrator. He was the one that had dominion over all God's creation. God put Adam in that garden to rule. And he said, don't do something. By the way, these are words Moses wrote. Moses wasn't there, but God used Moses to write about them. And so Adam had dominion, But, of course, we know in Genesis chapter 3 that dominion was broken. And there was a problem with Adam and Eve, and they were ushered out because they ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And now mankind is separated from God. Peace is lost. But contained in Genesis 3, in the Torah that Moses wrote, is a verse. In the midst of that awful time of sin and separation, there's a promise. The seed of the woman would come and restore that broken world. Well, you fast forward, and God, according to the Torah, very important, according to the Torah, God gives a covenant to Abraham. He calls a man in Genesis chapter 12. And he gives an unconditional promise. We know it's unconditional because he put Abraham to sleep. And he, God, went through the pieces. But in Genesis chapter 12, he called Abraham. And he promised in Genesis chapter 12 a land, a seed, and a blessing. And the land that he spoke about would be from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates, a big swath of land that God promised to Israel. They would own this land. They would own it. He was going to give it to them as promised by Abraham. We're told in Genesis 12 that God would bless him, that he would bless those who blessed Abraham's descendants. And we're told that one day there would be this seed of the woman who would come. We're told also that God cut a covenant with Abraham. He cut a covenant. Circumcision, sealed in blood, unconditionally promised. It's theirs forever. And because of that unconditional covenant, the sign for it was circumcision, marking out this people that God had chosen. There were no Jews in the garden. There were no Jews right after the garden. There were no Jewish people when God called Abraham, but now he was setting him apart. And as you fast forward in the Torah, you realize that God called Abraham and Abraham's son Isaac and Jacob and his 12 sons. And we find that the people that God called, as we read in the Torah, are now, through Joseph, in Egypt. Fast forward 400 years. And they're slaves. And God raises up Moses. Moshe Rabbeinu. He raised up, he does look kind of like Charlton Heston, at least I think so. He raised him up. And if you turn to Exodus chapter 3, and you read in verse 4, so when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moshe, Moshe, Moshe. And he said, here I am. He said, don't draw near this place. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you're standing is holy ground. Moreover, he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. There is a connection to Abraham as Moses is called by God. We're told in verse 10, I'm going to send you. God is going to send Moshe. He becomes a theocratic administrator, not exactly the same as Adam, but he is the one that God is going to use during this period of time. He would be the one to lead the Israelites out of bondage. As we already said, he speaks to God face to face. That encounter before the burning bush is one that impacted me as I watched that movie with Charlton Heston. His hair turned white as he stands in God's holy place. And we're told in the Torah, in Deuteronomy, the 5th book, there is none like Moses. We were right growing up to have Moses as a biggie in our house. Moses is big amongst the Jewish people. He's significant amongst them. He is the one that redeemed them. He is the one that interfaced with God. He was the liberator. He went toe-to-toe against Pharaoh. And so we had before Sinai And this is right before Sinai. And now God's going to test his people. He's going to use Moses at Sinai. So they're out of bondage. They're walking in the wilderness. You have a lot of Egypt in these folks. They've lived this way a long time, and God has to get Egypt out of them. And so at Sinai, we're told in Exodus chapter 20 and verse 20, "Do not fear, for God has come to test you, and that his fear may be before you, so that you may not sin." Moses was getting the law, the tablets, the 10 Commandments. Sometimes I wish there were only 10. Growing up, I realized 10. 10. We have 613. But the fact of the matter is, none of us can get by 10. I've taught numerous Bible studies with Jewish people talking about just the 10 Commandments. I remember one of the people who attended the study, we were only in the second week, and they said, "Hey, things aren't looking good, and I'm not real optimistic right now," because sin is revealed in the law because God is holy. Deuteronomy chapter 8 and verse 2 says, "And you shall remember the Lord your God who led you all the way these 40 years in the wilderness to humble you and test you, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not." Moses was tasked with going up and getting the law, and we call it the Mosaic covenant. That's the covenant that impacted my life growing up. That's the covenant where we were chosen by God, he chose us, and we chose him. Listen to what it says in Exodus 19 and verses 5 to 8. "Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people, for all the earth is mine, and you shall be a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel." God is telling Moses, these words which I'm giving to you, you need to agree with me. You need to consent to what I'm telling you. So Moses came, and he called for the elders of the people and laid before them all these words which the Lord commanded him. Then all the people answered together and said, and here it is, "All that the Lord has spoken, we will do." So Moses brought back the words of the people to the Lord. I'm telling you today that there are Jewish people who believe they could do all that the Lord has spoken. I tried doing it, but at a very young age, I realized I could not do it. But they're in agreement. We're going to do it. It was a fantastic scene. The Mount Sinai, they didn't want to go up. Moses went up. It was too holy. The smoke, the lightning, the thunder, all of it. But when Moses came back, they said, "We'll do it." The covenant is based on obedience. Exodus 19 and verse 5 says, if you will obey me, then you shall be a special treasure unto me. So the Abrahamic covenant in the Torah tells us that the ownership of the land is yours forever. I'm giving it to you. It's as good as done. It is yours forever. This covenant is different. This covenant talks about possessing the land. This covenant has a condition. Yes, this land is yours, but you might not always be in it, because unless you're obedient to the words that I give, unless you're obedient, you're going to leave, because I'm going to drive you out. And if they keep it, however, God promises there'll be a kingdom of priests. That means all of them could be a kingdom of priests. The people answer, yes. All the people said together, all that the Lord spoke, we will do. Kind of like football fans and baseball fans. Yay, 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 until their guy or their team doesn't come through. I know because I've been that way too. The team, it's awful. There are two basic treaties that were in the East at that time, ancient Near East. One was called a parity treaty. A parity treaty is when two partners or two groups who are equal in every sense of the word, they're equal, they agree on whatever it is they agree. A treaty is made and they agree. They're equal partners. But there was another treaty called the Suzerain Vassal Treaty. And that treaty was different because the suzerain was a state or sovereign person who was higher than the vassal. So they were unequal. And the suzerain gave a treaty guaranteeing certain things, but the vassals, if they agreed, were under him or the state. And financial tribute was given. Loyalty was demanded. If the vassal had any other suzerain, it was trouble. They could only have one, no matter how many others might tempt them. And when we think of this Mosaic covenant, this promise that God has given to Israel, they saw his power. They saw Moses and his interaction with him. They saw Moses' face with the glory of God, and they said, yes, we agree. We will do it. Well, let's see the consequences of obedience or disobedience in the Mosaic covenant. You have blessings and cursings. As Jewish people, I grew up this way. The greeting that you might have when you see somebody is, are you doing okay? Is everything okay? Not amongst my people. We say, is anything okay? Do you have anything? Because things always happen to us. Tsuris, we call it. Well, the Mosaic law is not designed to bring tsuris. It's designed to prevent it. And God outlines exactly how to do that. So in Leviticus 26, in verse 1, it says, you shall not make idols for yourself. Oh, that seems pretty easy to do. I know growing up, the idea of Jesus from a Jewish point of view, that breaks that commandment. We don't believe in man being God. We don't believe in carved images. It seems easy enough until you find out that the Bible talks about different kinds of idols, not just the ones made out of stone, but the ones that we create in our heart. But you shall not make idols for yourself. You shall keep my Sabbaths. Remember what I said, there's amongst very Orthodox Jews, one 24-hour period. Get all 15 million Jewish people for one Shabbat around the world, follow all the law perfectly, the kingdom will come. When God says this in Leviticus, you shall keep my Sabbath and reverence my sanctuary, that's a problem. It's a problem of our heart. And now there isn't even a sanctuary. It says, if you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments, then I'll give you rain in its season. The land shall yield its produce. The trees of the field shall yield their fruit. Your threshing shall last till the time of vintage. You shall eat your bread to the full. You will dwell in your land safely. I'll give you peace in the land. I'll rid you the land of evil beasts, and the sword will not go through your land. You will chase your enemies, and they shall fall by the sword before you. Great! All I have to do is always obey God. Never turn to the right and left, and life will be sweet. That's kingdom-style living. After all this, God says, if you don't obey me, but walk contrary to me, read the Torah, read just the 5 books, I want you to read all of it, but just look at the 5 books and you'll see, it doesn't take us long. If you don't obey, if you walk contrary to me, I'm going to walk contrary to you. Remember, he is higher. We are lower. This is not an equal partnership. We're basing it on the superiority of God and who he is. God says, I'll walk contrary to you, and I'll chasten you 7 times. You shall eat the flesh of your sons and daughters. I will lay your cities waste. I will bring your land to desolation. I will scatter you among the nations. Look, built into the Mosaic covenant are blessings, but severe curses. And my people, God's chosen people, the ones that he chose, the apple of his eye, said, yes, we're going to do it. Deuteronomy 28, we're still in the Torah. Moses wrote this. If you obey the voice of the Lord, I'll set you high above all nations. Blessings will come. If you do not obey the voice of the Lord, cursed you shall be in the city. Cursed shall be your basket. Cursed the fruit of your body. Look, Jewish history is rife with fulfilling exactly what the Mosaic covenant said. Look, my people are the example of what happens when you're disobedient to God. My people are an example of the promises that God gives and how he can bless, but also under this covenant, if there is not obedience, God will deliver on his promise. So that's Sinai. We had before Sinai great promises from the Abrahamic covenant, promise of the land forever, the Mosaic covenant at Sinai. We have the law that he gives and the blessings and curses that are outlined. And then we have after Sinai. After Sinai. How did Israel do in the test? God's test to Israel. Well, Deuteronomy chapter 4, Moses tells us, when you beget children and grandchildren and have grown old in the land and act corruptly and make a carved image in the form of anything and do evil in the sight of the Lord your God to provoke him to anger, I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day that you will soon utterly perish from the land which you cross over the Jordan to possess. You will not prolong your days in it, but will be utterly destroyed, and the Lord will scatter you among the peoples, and you will be left few in number among the nations where the Lord will drive you. And there you will serve gods and work of men's hands, wood and stone, which neither see, nor hear, nor eat, nor smell. Judgment. That's really what the Torah talks about. That's what the prophets talk about. There's this constant struggle of disobedience and turning away from God in the midst of the promise and the blessing that he gave in that covenant that we agreed to. I remember when I came to the point in my life when I said, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow I die. I didn't quote it that way. That's Solomon's words. But that was my attitude because the law was crushing me. The law was telling me that I fall short. There is no hope under the law. But that's not all that Moses wrote about. Thank God. That's not all. He wrote about a king. He wrote about a king. In Deuteronomy 17 and verse 15, he said, you shall surely set a king over you, whom the Lord your God chooses. One from among your brethren you shall set as king over you. You may not set a foreigner over you who is not your brother. We also know in Genesis 49 and verse 10, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh comes. Moses gave words apart from judgment that gives great hope. There is a king coming. Was it Saul? Well, Saul was amongst his own, but it wasn't Saul. Was it David? It looked good for a while, but David was just a human being. The Davidic dynasty only went to Solomon as far as a united kingdom is concerned. And so a king is promised. Kings come, but because they broke the covenant, they were scattered and they were away and the kingdom divided. You had all kinds of trouble. No peace, no shalom, no baskets full the way it was promised. But Moses, in addition to promising a king, promised a prophet. A prophet. Deuteronomy 18 and verse 15 says, the Lord raises up a prophet like Moshe. A prophet like Moshe is going to come, better than Moshe, from your brethren. God's words will be in his mouth, and he will speak what God commands. There is hidden in the Torah a hope beyond just full baskets of fruit and beyond a kingdom that will last a short time. Moshe Rabbeinu's words, his words from the Torah, add up for us to a great blessing. We have that Abrahamic promise, that unconditional promise of the land, descendants coming and blessing, and there'll be ownership of the land. God gives it to them eternally. It's theirs. That land is theirs. The Mosaic covenant, conditioned, possession, only if you're obedient. I'll kick you out, I'll bring you back. I'll kick you out, I'll bring you back. You know, Moshe knew that this would fail. He warned, but I think he knew. And then time passes. And when you get to the New Testament, and this is the connection for me personally, because one day in 1975, I, who was never interested in Jesus, but in 1975, through a series of Bible verses that I read, one of those verses was written by the Apostle Paul. And the connection that I had with Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe the ceramic sculptor with the 10 Commandments, Moshe the leader, Moshe the one that God used, spoke face to face. And then I read from another Jewish man, the Apostle Paul, Saul, in the fullness of time. In the fullness of time, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under the law. This was it. This was it. The law given. Who could follow the law? No one could follow the law. I have no hope that all Jews will follow the Shabbat laws. But I realize that the one promised never broke a law, never sinned, was spotless and blameless. In fact, in Matthew chapter 15 and verse 24, it says, Jesus is speaking. He said, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Now look, if you're Gentile, you benefit, but this makes me smile. Moses' words are coming to fruition. Here is the person who could follow every law. He actually wrote the law. And he said, my purpose, as Moses said, I've come to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. I'm coming where I know you can't follow the law, but you can believe in me. I am the promised prophet. I am the promised king. Don't think that I came to destroy the law. I'm on your side. I'm the one. I'm him. I did not come to destroy the law. I came to fulfill the law. When the Jewish leaders rejected Jesus, they rejected Moshe. When I tell Jewish people about the Messiah and they talk about the law, they need to know that I am coming alongside them, that Jesus is coming alongside. He was the one that fulfilled it. It's in him, and when we trust him, we're made righteous. In John chapter 5, it says, "Do not think that I shall accuse you to the Father. There was one who accuses you, Moshe, in whom you trust. For if you believed Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote about me. But if you don't believe his writings, how will you believe my words?" Today I'm telling you, the issue is believing Moses' writings. Most Jewish people today don't believe the Torah. And Jesus is saying, believe the Torah. Believe what Moses said. And then you'll believe in me. And in God's sovereignty, it's true. I believed in Moses. He was a big part of my life. And when I was confronted with Jesus, it was as though I couldn't say no. In Matthew chapter 23 and verses 37 to 39, it says, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. For I say to you, you shall see me no more, till you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Moshe teaches us that we fall short of the glory of God. Moses teaches us that God's standard is way beyond us. He is the suzerain, and we are the vassals. He is high up, and we are lowly. We tend to go after other ones when we're told not to. You know, when you reach my age, there comes a point, at least for me, where I'm listening on my device, Christian deceased speakers. I listen to dead people. Old messages that by the technology that we have is so wonderful that I'm able to go back to people who are no longer here, yet their ministry continues. And one of the men that I listen to is Adrian Rogers. And he said something that really struck me. He said this: no one is ready for Calvary. Calvary, that's where Jesus died. He hung on the cross at Calvary. No one is ready for Calvary until he's been at Sinai. And for me, that's true. And really, it's true for you too. Because unless you know you're a sinner, unless you know you fall short of the glory of God, why would you even consider being saved? Saved from what? Back in the early days of my ministry, I did door-to-door evangelism. Today, with all the things on the door and you knock on the door, nobody would ever come. I realize that. But back then, we did. And I was in a very affluent neighborhood, and there was a BMW in the driveway. There was a woman, honestly, in her dress. I thought it was Joan Cleaver, Joan Cleaver, I think it was. Leave it to Beaver. She's in a dress, working on the garden and not getting dirty. It was amazing. And there was a guy who had, the sweater over the shoulders so you look like you're kind of elite. Well, I was walking and I got into a conversation with them. And they were both very nice, and they were willing to talk. And he said, "Oh, you want to see people saved?" I said, "Yes, I do. Here's what the Bible says." And he kind of looks at me and says, "Look, saved from what?" It's true. Saved from what? He had the house. The couple could have been on a cover of a magazine. They saw no need to be saved. The Mosaic covenant Moses the teacher, teaches us if you read what he says and believe it, you fall short of the glory of God, but by his grace, he sent his son to die for us.